The small band of pilgrims which first landed on our shores in 1620 and their followers in 1630 were no mere religious refugees. These courageous settlers were embarking on a grand historic mission dedicated to enshrine the best of the cultural achievements of their native Europe on these wild and untamed shores of North America, at a distance far from the empires and wars consuming their homelands. Their story must be told, that their voices may whisper to us on these same shores today, that we may realize the special destiny of these United States and complete their unfinished mission, passed to us from hand to hand through centuries since then. A mission, a destiny which we must choose to accept, lest we be haunted by ghosts of man's mission failed for many centuries yet to come. 500 years ago, civilization stood within arm's reach of eliminating the ancient curse of empire. In the aftermath of Europe's classical Renaissance, the leading powers of Europe formed themselves into a military alliance, intending to retaliate against imperialism and its seat in the city of Venice, whose predatory practices of finance and war had driven Europe into the Dark Ages, from which Europe had only recently escaped. Although this European alliance, called the League of Cambrai, was broken up through Venetian intrigue and subversion before it was able to deliver its final blow, the Venetian Empire was brought to its knees, and by the middle 1500s was financially bankrupt. In 1582, a new party took over in the embattled city of Venice. They called themselves I Giovani, Young Venice, a party led by Paolo Sarpi. Sarpi knew that the old pre-Renaissance mode of imperialism was over, and that Venice would be doomed if it were to continue to adhere to that outdated model. Although the species was the same, Sarpi's system was a new breed of empire. Sarpi's plan was to uproot and transplant the imperial headquarters of Venice from its position on the Italian coast to what would be its new home, the islands lying off the northern coast of Europe, from which Venice would control the Atlantic seas, recently opened for trade and commerce by naval expeditions from Western Europe. Sarpi's Venice began setting up outposts on the Atlantic coast, first in the maritime city of Amsterdam, turning this port city into the Venice of the North, and then exploiting an environment of internal political chaos in England following the assassination of Mary Queen of Scots by Elizabeth I, the empire founded the Venice Company and other imperial institutions of finance in London. Venice consolidated its political control over London with agents inside the cabinet of James I upon his accession to power in 1603. A small movement of political dissidents began organizing a movement in England against the emerging paradigm of imperialism and in defense of a society of Renaissance humanism. Gathering for secret meetings in a town just outside London, they advocated resistance and separation from the civil and religious establishment. However, members of this group, marked by the English government as outlaws, were fined and imprisoned. No longer able to operate freely inside England, this movement escaped the island and coalesced in 1608 in the Netherlands. Although Amsterdam, too, was coming under the control of the Venetian Empire, this small movement of humanist republicans operated for nearly a decade out of the university town of Leiden, writing and circulating pamphlets and books critical of the political leadership in England. Their titles included An Admonition to the Parliament and The People's Plea. Printed on a press housed at the University of Leiden, these pamphlets circulated through the exile community in the Netherlands and were smuggled into England, where they were secretly distributed and dispersed. Their subject, a defense of the Renaissance notion of the exalted nature of man as a mirror of his Creator and endowed with a unique power to do the good. While this small but dedicated network maintained its defense of Renaissance humanism, Paolo Sarpi's new philosophy of Venetian liberalism, a philosophy of slavery and usury, secured increasing hegemony over policy-making in both the Netherlands and England. In 1616, King James decided to retaliate against the attacks published in John Robinson's pamphlets. His ambassador to Holland, a personal friend of Paulo Sarpi, convinced the Dutch government in Amsterdam to issue a ban on all unlicensed printing, and put out a warrant for the arrest for the owners and operators of the subversive press, William Brewster and Thomas Brewer, the partners of Robinson. For 2.5 years, however, pamphlets and books continued to be printed from the hidden press, until the secret location was discovered by the authorities and seized, and Thomas Brewer arrested, sentenced to 14 years in prison. William Brewster, however, escaped arrest. With the authorities still pursuing him with a warrant for his head, Brewster escaped the Netherlands back to England, where he conducted secret negotiations with a group of private merchants, convincing them to grant himself and some 50 members of his Leiden congregation passage on one of their trading ships, along with 50 other persons from among their allies in England. He arranged that this ship would depart England from an alternate port to avoid the arrest and imprisonment of all 100 members of this secret party, Brewster himself boarding the vessel in disguise to avoid discovery. The plan worked. Departing from the port of Southampton in England, this ship was accompanied by another, purchased previously in Holland. However, the captain of this second ship was secretly working for the Dutch, and had been assigned by the authorities to prevent the voyage by sabotaging his own ship and permanently delaying the departure. After being forced to return to port twice for repairs before even leaving England, Brewster had no choice but to give up this second ship. On September 16, 1620, already late into the year, Brewster's party was at sea. The single ship which they had crowded onto was named the Mayflower. Its destination, the distant wild shores of North America, the new continent over the Atlantic horizon, which Christopher Columbus had discovered for Europe not much more than a century before. May not and ought not the children of these fathers rightly say, "Our fathers were Englishmen, which came over this great ocean and were ready to perish in this wilderness"? The chronicle of the Mayflower's voyage, its landfall at Cape Cod, the founding of the Plymouth colony on the mainland, and the hardships endured by the settlers circulated throughout England over the next 10 years in the writings of William Bradford, among the minority of the original passengers of that ship who survived the first winter in America. Being thus past the vast ocean and a sea of troubles, they had now no friends to welcome them, nor inns to entertain or refreshen their weather-beaten bodies. The settlers formed themselves into a body politic, a civil government, electing among themselves those who would govern, choosing such persons as would entirely love and promote the common good. On these shores, princes no longer ruled over men. There were no nobility among them. No man was by birth set above another. No man was furnished with any special eminence above the rest. 10 years after the first pioneers at Plymouth, John Winthrop followed, bringing with him 300 more. But as these settlers laid the first stones for a modern nation-state in America, Europe descended quickly into war. Venice reignited the religious conflicts which had set nation against nation, attempting to finally erase all memory of the achievements of the great Renaissance, which Europe had enjoyed 2 centuries before, hoping to secure its new imperial seat in Northern Europe. But the seat for an entirely different kind of system was emerging in Winthrop's Boston, the later birthplace of young Ben Franklin. His is a story which must also be told, as he grew to give the world its first true republic. Now is the time, however, that we, today, turn our charitable eye back to the rest of mankind, that we may fulfill our special national destiny. We reach our hand towards the nations of Eurasia, and all others willing, and form amongst us a community of nations, freed from the oligarchical depravities which our brave fathers originally left behind, on the shores of imperial Europe.